Have you ever poured your heart into something, your time, your energy, your actual soul, only to be kicked to the curb like yesterday's trash? Because that's exactly what happened to me. My name's Michael Grant. I'm 39, a systems automation engineer by trade. I didn't just have a job, I lived it. My brain never shut off. I'd be in the shower thinking about sensor calibration, eating dinner and scribbling down process maps on napkins. I was that guy. I worked at a rising tech startup in Denver, Colorado, focused on robotics and AI-driven automation for manufacturing. Not one of those glossy, changing-the-world Silicon Valley clowns, but a gritty, hungry group of engineers trying to make real products that solved real problems. I joined 6 years ago, back when we were still working out of a converted warehouse with spotty Wi-Fi and no heating. I was employee number 7. Rachel King, our operations director, used to call me the brain of the beast. I designed an adaptive system that streamlined production by over 60%. That's not marketing fluff. That's 6-figure savings per week for our biggest client. I spent 3 years of my life building it. Sleepless nights, weekends gone, missed birthdays. I wasn't looking for applause. I believed in what we were doing. Or what I thought we were doing. Eric Dunn, one of the co-founders, used to pull me aside during coffee breaks and say, "Mike, one day you're going to be CTO of this place. You've got that kind of mind." I didn't let it go to my head, but I won't lie. It meant something. I trusted them. So when I walked into the office that Tuesday morning and saw Rachel and Eric waiting in the conference room with HR, I knew something was off. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The air was thick, like something had died and no one wanted to say it out loud. "Michael," Rachel said, voice all sugar and knives, "we've decided to go in a different direction." Just like that. No warning, no explanation, no thank you. 6 years, gone in 60 seconds. I walked out with a cardboard box and a pit in my stomach. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that firing me was the worst mistake they'd ever make, because I was about to make sure they paid for it. Every last dollar. And hey, if stories like this hit you right in the gut, take a second to hit that like button, drop a comment sharing your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. Back when I joined the company, it wasn't even on the map. We were a skeleton crew with second-hand chairs, borrowed server racks, and more ambition than cash. Our lab had duct tape on the floors and cables hanging like jungle vines from the ceiling. Most people would have run screaming. I fell in love with the chaos. I'd always been a builder. As a kid, I took apart remote controls just to see how they worked. Now I was helping design a machine learning-powered automation system that could transform American factories. That kind of challenge, it felt like playing chess with the future, and I was winning. We worked brutal hours. It was normal to stay until 11 p.m., go home, sleep 4 hours, and come back with a cold coffee and a new idea. And we weren't doing it for stock options or cushy titles. We believed in it. That's what made it feel like a family. Rachel, the operations director, ran logistics like a battlefield commander. Sharp, decisive, intimidating, but fair. At least that's what I thought at first. Eric, one of the founders, was more like the friendly face of the company. He'd swing by your desk, ask about your weekend, and act like everyone's big brother. Looking back now, I realized something terrifying. They were playing roles. Rachel was the hammer, Eric was the velvet glove, and I was the golden goose. I remember one afternoon, we had just landed our first multi-million-dollar client, thanks to a demo I built from scratch. While everyone else celebrated with pizza and beer in the break room, Rachel called me into her office. I thought she was going to give me a bonus. You know what she said? "You're an asset, Michael. As long as you stay focused and don't get distracted with ownership stuff, we'll all win." I laughed it off back then. Ownership stuff. She made it sound dirty, like ambition was some kind of virus. And I didn't push back. I didn't ask for equity, didn't lawyer up, didn't even save a backup of my contract. I just nodded and went back to work. Because I trusted them. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, they'd eventually recognize what I was worth. Turns out they already had. They just didn't plan on sharing it with me. The idea came to me during a factory tour. We were visiting a client in Ohio, old-school industrial plant, grease-stained floors, machines so loud they rattled your ribs. I noticed how much time was wasted just moving parts from one station to another. Workers were constantly adjusting conveyors, clearing jams, restarting systems. Every second lost was dollars bleeding out. On the flight home, I started sketching. By the time we landed, I had the bones of a system in my head, one that could learn the flow of production and adapt in real time. Not just automation, but adaptive automation. A nervous system for the entire line. Over the next 2 years, I poured every ounce of myself into it. The first version was clunky. Sensors failed, motors misfired, but I kept going. I refined the algorithm, redesigned the interfaces, tested it again and again. I started sleeping in the office some nights, not because anyone told me to, but because I couldn't leave it unfinished. I was obsessed, sure, but it was beautiful, a machine that learned, that adjusted, that actually improved over time. I called it Atlas, not because it was strong, but because it carried the weight of everything else. We pitched it to a potential client in Wisconsin, big auto parts manufacturer. I ran the demo. The whole production line shifted smoothly, predicting bottlenecks before they even happened. The client's jaw dropped. They signed a contract that same day. That deal alone kept the company afloat for a year. And what did I get? A pat on the back, a coffee mug with my name misspelled, and a quiet promise from Eric. "Your time's coming, Mike. Just be patient." I didn't ask questions. I didn't push. I figured, hey, the recognition will come. Good work always shines, right? Wrong. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, was that while I was perfecting Atlas, Rachel and Eric were shopping it around like it was theirs. They'd been having quiet dinners with investors. Demos I built were being used to pitch to new partners. No one mentioned my name. I was the engine, and they were already selling the car. And when it became clear that they didn't need me anymore to run it, well, I became a liability. Too smart, too close to the core, too dangerous. So they did the one thing they thought would solve their problem. They cut me loose. But what they didn't realize was that Atlas wasn't just code. It was mine. And I wasn't about to let them steal my life's work without consequences. You know what's funny? When you spend enough time with people, you start mistaking proximity for loyalty. Just because someone sits across from you in a conference room every day doesn't mean they'd hesitate to shove you under a bus if it helped their stock options. Rachel King wasn't just my boss. She was the boss. Nothing moved in that company unless Rachel said so. She was sharp, always 2 steps ahead, and ran that office like it was a chessboard. She'd look at you and already know your next 3 moves, but she also knew how to be charming. She'd organize team lunches, handwrite thank you notes, give speeches about building something real together, and she had a way of making you feel like you were chosen, special. Eric Dunn, on the other hand, was the approachable one. Big smile, Patagonia vests, made jokes about espresso and burnout. He'd talk to interns like they were future CEOs. He once pulled me aside after a quarterly review and said, "You're not just an engineer, Mike. You're part of the DNA here." DNA. That word stuck with me. I'd sit in meetings with them, brainstorm for hours, and leave the room thinking these people believe in me. We shared late nights, tense deadlines, product launches that felt like childbirth. And in all of it, I never once questioned their intentions. But over time, the tone shifted. It was small things at first. Rachel stopped inviting me to certain meetings, even ones clearly about Atlas. Eric became more vague in his praise, like he was trying to dilute my contribution. They started asking me to summarize what I'd been working on in emails, not meetings. They wanted it in writing. And then came the NDA. One afternoon, Rachel slid a new non-disclosure agreement across my desk. She called it a routine update, said it was just to align with new investor expectations. But it was 30 pages long, full of legal traps, and most importantly, it quietly assigned all intellectual property rights to the company, retroactively. I didn't sign it. I said I'd let my lawyer look it over, and Rachel's smile cracked just a little. That was the moment I knew something was off. Her response? Of course. Totally understand. Just don't take too long, Mike. We need to move fast. I didn't take too long, but clearly I didn't move fast enough, because they were already planning their next move, one that didn't include me. And I had no idea that the knife was already halfway in. I used to love walking into the office early. There was this stillness before the buzz kicked in. Just me, the hum of the servers, and a half-empty mug of coffee going cold on my desk while I tweaked code or adjusted schematics. But somewhere along the way, that peaceful routine turned heavy. The smiles in the hallway started feeling plastic. Conversations that used to stop when I entered the room didn't start up again once I left. People I'd mentored started avoiding eye contact, like I'd become radioactive. And the strangest part? Rachel and Eric acted normal, almost too normal. They kept telling me how crucial I was, how they were lucky to have me. But then why did I start getting left-off project updates? Why did Atlas start getting assigned to junior engineers I hadn't even trained? One afternoon, I walked into the lab and found two of them, new hires, working on a modified version of my system. When I asked what they were doing, they froze. Eric asked us to test this version, said he needed a backup model running. A backup? Since when? I was the model. I went straight to Rachel. She gave me that same polished smile and said, "Just building redundancies, Mike. Standard procedure, you know how it is." Yeah, I knew exactly how it was. That's when I checked the internal logs. My admin access had been silently downgraded 2 weeks earlier. I couldn't even access the full diagnostics on the latest builds. Some of the documentation I wrote had been copied, renamed and shared under someone else's credentials. My work, my intellectual property, was being sanitized. And the worst part? It was being done quietly. No confrontation, no open betrayal, just slow erasure, like watching your reflection fade from a mirror. I wanted to believe I was being paranoid. I mean, who would cut out the guy who built the heart of their entire product? But the gut punch came later that week. We had a quarterly all-hands meeting. Everyone gathered in the main conference room. Eric stood up to give a presentation on what's next for Atlas. He clicked through slides showing projections, upgrades, future rollouts. Not once did he say my name. Not once. People clapped, nodded, looked around like they'd just witnessed a master plan. I just sat there, in the back row, my hands cold, my chest hollow. That was the moment I realized. They were already writing me out of the story. And the ending? They were planning to write that without me, too. It was a Tuesday morning. Nothing felt unusual at first. I walked into the office with my usual black coffee and half a bagel in hand. My code editor was still open from the night before, just the way I'd left it. I was halfway through typing a note for one of the junior devs when my phone buzzed. "Can you swing by the conference room, just a quick touch base?" That was the message. No subject line, no context. Sent from Rachel's assistant. I didn't think much of it. We had impromptu check-ins all the time. But the moment I opened the door, I knew. Rachel was sitting at the head of the table, her laptop closed. Never a good sign. Eric stood by the window, arms folded, looking everywhere but at me. And there was someone else in the room. A woman from HR. New. I didn't even know her name. "Michael," Rachel started with that tone. Too calm, too polished. "We want to thank you for everything you've contributed to the company." That was the first line. It hit like a punch to the throat. Eric chimed in next, talking like he was narrating someone else's funeral. "You've been a pillar of this place, truly. But after reviewing our strategic direction and funding priorities, we've decided to restructure, and unfortunately, your role is being eliminated." Eliminated. Like I was a line item on a spreadsheet, something to be deleted with a keystroke. I opened my mouth to speak, but Rachel kept going. "There's a severance package in this envelope. We'd appreciate if you didn't access the internal network or any of the proprietary files moving forward, and we'd prefer if today was your last day." Today. I stared at them. No warning, no explanation, no offer to transition. Just get out. I asked about Atlas. I asked who would maintain the systems, who understood the architecture. Rachel didn't blink. "We've trained others. We'll be fine." I almost laughed. Trained others. The codebase was so complex I had to document it with diagrams that looked like subway maps. They didn't even know where half the variables lived. Eric finally looked at me. His voice dropped. "It's not personal, Mike. It's business." Ah, the oldest lie in the book. They offered to have someone help me pack up. I refused. I walked to my desk in silence, picked up the same cardboard box they gave everyone who got axed, and dumped in a few notebooks and my desk plant. As I left the building, the lobby felt colder. The people passing me didn't make eye contact, like I had a scarlet letter burned into my back. But what they didn't know, what they should have known, is that I built this house. I knew every wire, every screw, every secret hallway, and I wasn't leaving quietly. It had been 3 days since I got the boot. 3 days of silence. No calls, no emails, no one checking in, not even the people I used to share lunch with. I was still processing the shock, trying to decide whether I should call a lawyer or just disappear and start over. And then I saw it. A buddy of mine from college texted me, "Hey man, just saw your company on TechFront Live. They're talking about your project. Cool stuff. Cool stuff." I clicked the link and sat there frozen. There he was, Eric Dunn, my ex-colleague, ex-friend, now smiling across from a news anchor like he'd just discovered fire. "The system we've developed," he said, casually adjusting his jacket, "is a game changer. It uses predictive analytics and real-time learning to optimize industrial workflows. It's something I've been refining for the last few years." I've been refining. That phrase echoed like a gunshot in my head. Eric went on to explain the tech, using language I had literally written in internal documentation, word for word. He even showed a diagram I created. I recognized my own handwriting in one of the mock-up sketches they flashed on screen, and not once, not a single time, did he mention me. He took everything and branded it as his own. Rachel's name came up too. The interviewer called her the architect of operations and credited her for leading the tech team that brought the product to market. I felt sick. This wasn't just a case of office politics or someone taking too much credit in a meeting. This was full-blown intellectual theft, broadcast to the entire industry. A theft so bold, so shameless, it would have been almost laughable if it didn't sting so damn bad. They weren't just trying to erase me. They were rewriting history, without me in it. That's when the fire lit inside me. See, until that point I was angry, hurt, confused. But now, I was something else. I was focused. Because while they were smiling for the cameras, I was sitting on something they'd forgotten. Atlas wasn't just some software dumped on a server. It was a living system. And every heartbeat it had was still tied to me. And they had no idea that the man they tried to erase was about to flip the whole damn script. I didn't throw anything. I didn't scream. I didn't rage post on social media. I just sat there and still like a hurricane before landfall. Because the anger, it wasn't loud. It was surgical, focused. It carved out the hesitation, the self-doubt, the guilt, and what was left. Pure clarity. They thought they'd won. They thought that little envelope and that HR puppet could wipe out 6 years of blood, caffeine, and code. But they forgot one thing. I built Atlas. Not just the software, but the system. The neural engine, the auto-learning protocols, the security layers, and buried deep in its core was something even they didn't fully understand. A master credential. A single line of admin authority hard-coded in the earliest build, registered to me. With biometric verification, my fingerprint, my voice pattern, my retina, they'd been using a stripped-down version ever since I left, just enough to keep the system running, but without full access, they were flying blind. That was the moment I realized they needed me more than they ever admitted. And that was leverage. I pulled out my old laptop, the one they never touched because it wasn't company-issued. On it was the original dev environment, the real one, with logs, backups, full schematics, and a hidden module I never even deployed to production. Why? Because I never trusted anyone enough to hand over the keys. Call it paranoia, call it gut instinct, call it knowing too much about how people work when money's involved. Whatever it was, it saved me. I spent that night going through everything, reviewing server logs, checking version mismatches, cross-referencing user access credentials, and what I saw made me smirk. They hadn't added a new master admin. They couldn't, because that kind of access had to be granted by me. They were locked into a system they didn't fully own, and they didn't even realize it. I didn't move right away. I waited. I wanted them to feel comfortable, secure, in control, because the longer they sat on my stolen throne, the sweeter it would be when I pulled the floor out from under them. They thought I was out of the game, but I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The deeper I dug, the more obvious it became. They didn't know what they were doing. They thought deleting my company email and deactivating my keycard would sever the connection between me and Atlas. But Atlas wasn't just some SaaS platform you could reset with a password. It was a living ecosystem with roots, branches, and a brain. And that brain still answered to me. They'd been operating a neutered version of the system. The shell worked, sure. The interface opened, lights blinked. But the real magic, the adaptive layer, the core learning model that made Atlas truly valuable, it was offline. Why? Because that module required a biometric confirmation every 90 days to stay active. And guess who had the only valid biometric key? Not Rachel, not Eric, me. It was buried so deep in the code that even if they'd found it, they'd never understand how to activate it without breaking the system. I'd designed it that way on purpose, not out of arrogance, but for protection. Because I knew how fast loyalty could turn into ownership claims the moment a product became profitable. And their biggest mistake, they didn't file the patent correctly. See, when I first designed Atlas, I submitted early drafts of the concept to our internal archive, but they never completed the official patent under my name. They were waiting for a new round of funding to clean up the paperwork, so they presented the product, sold it, bragged about it on national TV, without ever securing legal ownership, which meant I still held all the original files, full dev history, and proof of authorship, time-stamped, versioned, and backed up across 2 separate drives. They thought I was outgunned, but I had something more powerful than lawyers. I had evidence. Evidence that this thing they were trying to sell to billion-dollar investors wasn't legally theirs. That the one person who could unlock its full potential, stabilize it and explain it to stakeholders, was the guy they tossed out like trash. And so I waited. I didn't storm in demanding justice, no. I let them trip over themselves trying to patch a system they didn't understand, while I built a quiet little version of Atlas 2.0 on my own machine, faster, smarter, cleaner. They were out there trying to sell a product, but I was preparing to own the solution. I didn't go public. I didn't tweet. I didn't blast anyone online. I didn't send angry emails to investors or write bitter blog posts like some ex-employee with an axe to grind. No. What I did was quieter, smarter. I made a list. Every client that had signed with the company in the last 12 months, every factory, logistics hub, and supply chain operation that was now running on Atlas, my Atlas. I'd sat in on most of those early meetings. I knew their pain points. I knew their budget cycles. I knew the names of their CTOs and their plant supervisors. I started making phone calls, not from my personal number. I used a new business number registered under a new LLC, something low-key. Grant Systems Solutions. Clean, professional, discreet. I positioned myself not as the bitter ex-employee, but as an independent consultant with deep familiarity with adaptive automation systems. I didn't name-drop the startup. I didn't need to. The moment I said, I helped design the architecture you're currently running, most of them perked up like I just offered them a flashlight in a blackout. Because here's what was happening on their end. Bugs, lags, downtime. Without me maintaining the core learning module, the system wasn't adapting the way it should. One client in Pennsylvania said their automated routing was starting to regress. Another in Texas told me they were 2 days away from scrapping the whole installation because support was non-existent. One by one, they started asking questions. Wait, weren't you the guy who presented the first demo? I thought you were leading the team. What happened? I didn't spill the drama, I simply said I moved on. And then I offered help. Not cheap, not desperate. I quoted premium rates. Why? Because I wasn't there to undercut. I was there to remind them why the system worked in the first place. And clients started biting. The first was a mid-sized manufacturer in Ohio, then a warehouse automation firm in Illinois. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 contracts signed. Small but solid. Enough to prove one thing. I was the product, not the brand, not the building, not the people who smiled on TV, me. And while Rachel and Eric were too busy chasing VC money and talking about scalability, I was quietly rebuilding their client base, one call at a time. They thought they fired me. They didn't realize they just freed me. It started small, just a few quiet contracts, a couple of consulting calls, a few thousand here, 10,000 there. But what they didn't realize, what Rachel and Eric never understood, is that trust isn't something you can fake. And once that trust is broken, it spreads like a crack in glass. The first big win came from a client we'd onboarded just a few months before I was let go. They were a mid-size warehouse operator in Michigan, using Atlas to handle dynamic shelf routing and automated sorting. Nothing fancy, until it stopped working. I got a call at 7:42 a.m. "Mike, this system you built, it's breaking down." They didn't say Eric's system. They didn't say Rachel's platform. They said mine. Turns out, the automated learning engine had stalled. The whole setup was relying on outdated routines because no one had updated the weight thresholds in the logic table. You know why? Because I was the one who used to do that manually. Every Friday, without fail, I logged into a private demo server I'd spun up on my own network and walked them through the fix in 20 minutes. They cut ties with the startup 2 days later, just like that. They said I was easier to work with, smarter, faster, and above all, honest. That one client leaving was a ripple, but ripples grow. Word spread, quietly, respectfully. The way it does when one professional leans into another at a trade conference and says, "Hey, between you and me, you should call this guy instead." Then came the second client, this one in Arizona. They didn't even wait for me to pitch. They reached out directly. "We hear you're the real mind behind the system. Can we talk?" Within 3 weeks, I had 5 active contracts. And for the first time in months, I was sleeping through the night. Not because I'd moved on, but because I was taking back what was mine. I wasn't sabotaging the company. I didn't need to. I was simply doing what they couldn't, solving the actual problems. Clients didn't want flash. They didn't care about TV interviews or VC buzzwords. They wanted results. They wanted someone who picked up the phone, someone who knew what the hell they were doing. And suddenly, Eric and Rachel were facing something they never planned for, a competitor they couldn't discredit. Because I wasn't just another rival. I was the original. I didn't need to spy to know things were falling apart. The signs were everywhere. Emails started leaking. Clients forwarding me chains from Rachel's team, full of excuses, vague promises, delays. One of them literally said, "We're working on a patch with our lead engineer," which was funny, because I was their lead engineer. And now, they had interns duct taping together code they didn't understand. Then came the support tickets. A former co-worker, one of the few still loyal to me, sent me screenshots of their internal chat logs. Panic everywhere. Updates crashing systems. Autonomous forklifts moving erratically. One warehouse in New Jersey had a 4-hour shutdown because the learning engine froze mid-cycle and locked the inventory grid. And remember that smart diagnostics module? The one I never deployed? They tried to reverse engineer it from my early drafts. Spoiler, they couldn't. Why? Because those drafts were booby-trapped, not with viruses or sabotage, just bad logic, dead ends, decoys. Stuff I left in on purpose to test idea flow. It was never meant to be used in production, but they didn't know that. They saw smart diagnostics in the file name and ran with it, pushed it into the live system. It took down 2 clients in 1 weekend. Suddenly, Eric wasn't smiling on TV anymore. They went into damage control mode. Rachel started calling emergency meetings, rescheduling investor pitches, reassigning half the tech team. And all the while, clients kept whispering my name. Some of them straight up asked, "Why don't you just hire Michael back?" But pride's a hell of a drug. Instead of picking up the phone, Rachel doubled down. She told her staff that I was trying to undermine the company out of revenge, that I was unstable, obsessed. Cute, right? But the thing is, obsession's not always a weakness. Sometimes it's what gives you an edge. While they were scrambling, I was scaling. Quietly, professionally. My client list had doubled, then tripled. One even offered me equity to stay long-term, and I hadn't even made my real move yet. Because the best revenge is letting them dig their own grave while you build a throne from the bricks they threw at you. And from where I stood, watching the cracks spread across their shiny startup walls like spiderwebs in glass, I knew the collapse was coming. All I had to do was wait. It was the biggest automation conference of the year. Hundreds of vendors, thousands of attendees, all under one roof. Startups, manufacturers, media, investors, all there to see what was next in industrial tech. And guess who was on the speaker list? That's right, Eric Dunn, scheduled to give a keynote on the future of adaptive automation. I saw the promo video online, glossy graphics, buzzwords, a clip of Eric smiling like he just cured world hunger. He was calling it Atlas Prime now, as if rebranding it somehow made it his. I wasn't mad. I was amused, because I'd already submitted my own presentation weeks earlier, under a new brand, Grant Systems Technologies. And unlike Eric, I wasn't pitching vaporware. I was launching a working product, Atlas 2.0. Faster, leaner, smarter. Mine. The organizers gave me a modest time slot. No fancy lights, no prime hour. But what I had didn't need hype. It worked. And that speaks louder than any promo video. The morning of the event, I walked in wearing a simple grey blazer and black jeans. No team, no handlers, no buzz, just results. When I stepped on stage, the room wasn't full, but by the time I finished my first demo, live, with real-time learning running on a mobile tablet, people were standing in the back. I explained everything. The original concept, the improvements I'd made, the system's independence from cloud reliance, its ability to function offline during outages. The crowd was hooked. And then I dropped the bomb. I showed a slide with version control history, timestamps, authorship logs, and development lineage. I didn't have to say it. The room connected the dots on their own. This wasn't just a new product. This was the product, and I was the mind behind it from day one. You could hear the murmurs ripple across the audience. Wait, isn't this the guy from... I thought Eric made that. No way, that was his work? I ended my talk with a single line. Don't just trust the name on the box. Trust the hands that built it. Polite applause turned into standing ovation. And here's the best part. Eric's talk was scheduled right after mine. He walked on stage to a half-empty room, because his audience was still outside, asking me for business cards. And just like that, the script flipped. You know how people say the truth always comes out? It's true, but sometimes it doesn't sneak out quietly. Sometimes it kicks the damn door down. The day after the conference, my inbox exploded. Messages from CTOs, reporters, potential partners, even a couple of investors who used to be on Rachel and Eric's board. They all wanted to know the same thing. Why weren't you the face of Atlas? I didn't even have to answer, because the damage was already done. Screenshots of my presentation were circulating on LinkedIn. Someone clipped the slide with the version history and posted it with the caption, "Guess who really built Atlas?" It went viral in a matter of hours. Tech blogs picked it up. Podcasts started talking about it. The phrase Atlasgate actually trended for a day. Rachel and Eric tried to spin it, of course. They released a joint statement calling it a misunderstanding, praising my early contributions, while insisting that the current system was a collaborative evolution. But it was too late. Clients didn't care about spin. They cared about results. And now they knew that the guy delivering real results wasn't working for the company anymore. He was the company. 2 major clients pulled out within 48 hours. Another froze payments pending technical validation. Investors started asking questions, some publicly. A journalist from a well-known tech outlet ran a feature titled, "The Man Behind the Machine, How Michael Grant Was Cut Out of His Own Creation." And it wasn't just headlines. Rachel's team started bleeding employees. Engineers jumped ship. Some reached out to me directly. One even wrote, "I stayed because I believed in what we built. Now I realize I was believing in you." Eric went dark on social media. Rachel cancelled all public appearances. Rumors swirled that they'd called an emergency board meeting and were discussing legal risk mitigation. But here's the kicker. There was nothing to mitigate, because I never stole anything, never hacked, never leaked, never threatened. I just built what I'd always been building, the right way. And when the house of cards they stacked on top of my work collapsed, I didn't even have to lift a finger. I just stood back and watched the wind do its job. It started with a voicemail. "Hey Mike, it's Rachel. I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. Could we maybe talk?" The voice was softer now, not commanding, not polished, just tired. I didn't call back. 2 days later, I got an email from Eric. A long one. No subject line, just his name in the from field. He rambled for 3 paragraphs about miscommunication and how things got out of hand. Said he still valued my insights. Then came the ask. They wanted me to consult, just a few hours, help them stabilize the platform and rebuild confidence with investors. He offered $10,000 for a single session. I didn't even open the attachment. The next day, the offer went up, then up again. By the end of the week, Rachel herself called from a blocked number. I picked up just to hear her squirm. "Michael," she started, "we made mistakes. I made mistakes. But we need to move forward, not backward. There's a way we can make this right, for everyone." I let her talk. She offered $200,000, not as a gift, not as hush money, as a crisis consulting fee, 4 hours of work, 1 meeting. In exchange, they wanted access to the real system, a patch, some technical validation, anything that would buy them time with the clients and investors circling like vultures. And they also wanted something else. They wanted a public statement from me, something that would clear the air. You know what that means, right? They didn't just want my help. They wanted me to fix their image, to give them cover, to let the world think we were all just one happy, misunderstood team. I asked Rachel one question. Will there be a written apology? She hesitated. We could maybe work something out privately. No, I said. It'll be public, or there's no deal. There was a long pause. Then she agreed. It took everything in me not to laugh. The same people who tossed me out like I was disposable now needed my name, my face, and my forgiveness just to stay afloat. And here's the thing. I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it for the ending, the kind that leaves no room for doubt about who really built the empire. The deal was set. $200,000 wired up front. No negotiations. No contracts drafted by their in-house legal team. Mine handled everything. I made it clear. I wasn't coming in as an employee. I was the solution. They were the ones in crisis. I was doing them a favor. I arrived at their office. My old office just before 10 a.m. Same glass doors. Same fake modern art in the lobby. Same receptionist who used to smile at me every morning, now visibly unsure whether to greet me or look away. I didn't wear a suit. I wore what I always wore. Jeans, boots, black t-shirt. Because I wasn't there to impress. I was there to remind them who I'd always been and who they tried to erase. Rachel met me at the elevator. Her eyes were swollen, like she hadn't slept in days. Eric trailed behind her, trying to muster that old fake charisma. "Michael," he said, extending his hand like we were old friends. I looked at it, then looked past him. Let's get this over with. The executive conference room was packed. Tech leads, board members, even a couple of external advisors, all of them watching me like I was some mythical creature that had just walked out of legend. I plugged in my laptop, accessed their crippled system, and began running diagnostics. In less than 30 minutes, I identified the bottlenecks, corrected the logic, and restored the adaptive engine back to full functionality. They watched in silence. No applause, no backpats. Just a quiet collective realization. He's the only one who could have done this. But I wasn't finished. Before I left, I handed Rachel a USB drive and a folded sheet of paper. "The statement," I said. "You'll post it exactly as written, today. No edits." She didn't argue, because she couldn't. That afternoon, on the company's official LinkedIn page, a post went live. We acknowledged that the original architecture of our adaptive automation system, known internally as Atlas, was developed by Michael Grant. We deeply regret any previous misrepresentation and extend our sincerest apologies to Mr. Grant for not giving him the recognition he rightfully deserved. His contributions were foundational and irreplaceable. The post went viral within the hour. That was the real payment. Not the money, not even the apology. It was the look on their faces. Knowing they'd built a company on my back, only to have the world reminded, publicly and permanently, that I was the architect. I walked out of that building the same way I came in 6 years ago. But this time I didn't owe them anything. They owed me. After everything, after the lies, the silence, the erasure, you'd think I'd want revenge to be loud. But it wasn't. It was quiet. It was walking out of that building without looking back, hearing the soft click of the doors closing behind me, not as exile, but as freedom. They still had their office space, their logo, their marketing team. But now, everyone knew the truth. Clients knew, investors knew, their own employees knew, and most importantly, they knew that no matter what they tried to rebuild, it would always be in the shadow of the man they underestimated. I didn't go on a press tour. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to, because every new contract I signed, every client who chose to work with me, Every email that started with, "I saw your presentation," that was the real win. I reinvested part of that 200K into my own platform. No hype, no middlemen, just tools that work. And people started talking. Word spread that if you wanted results, not promises, you called Grant Systems. And me? I finally slept again. Deep, peaceful, like closing a book that had sat open too long. People ask me sometimes, would you ever go back? If they offered you a top position, equity, a public title? I smile, because I already have something better. My name, my control, my freedom. See, the best part of revenge isn't destruction. It's reclamation. It's when you take back what's yours and build something even better with it. And maybe one day they'll walk past a trade show booth or open a newsletter and see my name at the top, not hidden in the footnotes, not in fine print. Front and center. They'll remember the day they said I was replaceable, and they'll know deep down they were wrong, dead wrong, because they didn't just fire me, they ignited me. Enjoyed the story? If that ending hit you in the gut the way it did for me, don't forget to like the video, drop a comment about what you would have done in my shoes, and hit that subscribe button for more stories like this, because trust me, we're just getting started.